a lot of times people think of dangerous people as something very obvious and overt. So, if someone's dangerous, they're going to come up and they're going to hold a gun and they're going to like ask me for my purse, or, they're going to literally ask me for the thing. It's going to be very obvious if I'm getting exploited, but it's not, because really good con artists and people who are very good at manipulating, they understand that the most effective way of getting things from people is not to be your enemy, it's to be your friend. And even deeper than a friend, it's to be your lover, if they can, and if that applies. So to get the orange from someone, there's lots of different tactics that can be used, but really examining how you might get an orange from someone as a friend, as a lover, as a business salesman. There's a lot of different areas where this analogy can kind of apply. But I could tell you lots of stories about people who have given their oranges away for free so that you think it's normal, and you almost want to be a part of that movement and that experience. I could convince you that there's a huge reward waiting for you on the other side if you give me the orange, whether it's access to me, whatever that reward might be. And then also, I can obviously tell you, like, I love you a lot, sort of this guilt tripping. If you loved me back, you would do this for me. So why are you not doing this for me? And it causes you to kind of question your own character. And if you don't have a strong sense of what love is, or what your own expectations for other people are or should be, you're up for grabs, really. The first part of the storyteller techniques is that you are cased for your vulnerabilities.
Mm.
But then after you're cased and they figure out what your vulnerabilities are, you're presented with a role. And most of the time, it's the special one, the most special one.
Yeah.
And in the world of modeling, I'm sure it's true for other creative areas as well, but in the world of modeling, you're always the most special one, as long as you play by the rules, do what you're told. I wasn't good at that. So I fell off that pedestal a lot. I kind of call that a pedestal role. And you're up here and they're up here because they're obviously super special too. Both of you are like really special. Um, and you're kind of set up with a flaw sometimes, not always. There's different like pedestal roles you can have. Sometimes it's like the best helper, like you're
Yeah.
the best caretaker.
Yeah.
And they're actually the one with the flaw. And then because you're codependent, that kind of like holds you hostage. They're like this helpless child. And you
Hmm.
can't ever like leave them because you're like the best caretaker and they need you to caretake. So there's definitely different types of roles that can come in. But when it comes time for them to start controlling you, they knock you off that pedestal. And that's very painful for you if you feel like you need to be up there, like you can't lose that special
Yes.
title. So within modeling, there was a lot of me being like knocked off the pedestal, trying to get back on it, knocked off the pedestal. And I had a very weak sense of self. So I was just trying to do whatever people wanted me to do to be really cool and accepted. And that was very like chaotic for me as well.
Ehren Dorsey, in a sentence, how would you describe grooming?
For me, I think about grooming in terms of the tactics that are used by someone to convince people, not just children, but adults as well, how to possibly do things that might not be in their best interest, how to desensitize people to ideas so that they comply and do something that you might want them to do. That's kind of how I would describe grooming. I know there might be people who are like really specific about definitions. I have friends who are like that. And I understand I might be stretching the term a little bit, but it's just because for me, I feel like it's really interesting to find the patterns in things, where maybe one label over here also actually does kind of apply over here as well, and examining that.
Hmm. Yeah, you have a real strength for patterns, analogies. One of my favorites that might help people to understand this grooming idea is you talk about everybody having an orange. What is
Mhm.
that?
Yes. So the idea, one reason this idea came to me is because I became very aware of the fact that I considered very few things inside of myself valuable. And there was a moment after a very serious situation that happened to me where I kind of looked up and I felt just very empty inside. And I really wasn't sure why. And then I started thinking about that, like the why of why I felt so empty. And I realized I had actually been giving away a lot of myself emotionally, physically. Um, I've never been the type of person to really give away assets, but that's another thing that someone might give away. And I realized that while I hadn't considered these things valuable, someone else had. And they had done a really good job of making sure that I didn't realize that because then I would stop giving it away for free. And they had further encouraged the narrative that these things weren't valuable as well. So the analogy that kind of came to me was the idea of an orange. If you have an orange and you have the orange and I want to get that orange from you, how would I get that orange from you? Because I think a lot of times people think of dangerous people as something very obvious and overt. So, if someone's dangerous, they're going to come up and they're going to hold a gun and they're going to like ask me for my purse, or, they're going to literally ask me for the thing. It's going to be very obvious if I'm getting exploited, but it's not, because really good con artists and people who are very good at manipulating, they understand that the most effective way of getting things from people is not to be your enemy, it's to be your friend. And even deeper than a friend, it's to be your lover, if they can, and if that applies. So to get the orange from someone, there's lots of different tactics that can be used, but really examining how you might get an orange from someone as a friend, as a lover, as a business salesman. There's a lot of different areas where this analogy can kind of apply. But I could tell you lots of stories about people who have given their oranges away for free so that you think it's normal and you almost want to be a part of that movement and that experience. I could convince you that there's a huge reward waiting for you on the other side if you give me the orange, whether it's access to me, whatever that reward might be. Um, and then also, I can obviously tell you, like, I love you a lot, sort of this guilt tripping. If you loved me back, you would do this for me. So why are you not doing this for me? And it causes you to kind of question your own character. And if you don't have a strong sense of what love is or what your own expectations for other people are or should be, you're up for grabs, really.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, they come in under the radar often, and it's tricky. As you pointed out, people do seem to think, and I was in this camp for a long time, that if there were a psychopath in your life, you would just know.
Hmm.
But in fact, the good ones, they can slip it right by you. The story of the orange thing I find particularly interesting too. I've seen this in play, and I think we
Can I?
forget. Yeah, what
Mhm.
would you like to say?
Well, my question to you back is like, why did you think that you would just know? Like, what obvious things did you think would be present?
Well, I probably had an idea from things like movies
Hmm.
that it was just that a psychopath is someone who's just, obviously dangerous.
Mm.
And beyond that, I'm not
It's good to
exactly
think
sure.
about it. And that's
Yeah.
what I like trying to do is
Yeah.
like, we don't oftentimes examine our own beliefs. It's not a bad thing. I'm not shaming
Hmm.
anyone, but
Yeah.
like a lot of what my YouTube channel is born out of is this
Right.
idea of like, okay, I actually have like all these beliefs, and I've never really like sat down, and a lot of them are based on assumptions, not necessarily like really knowing the why of why I believe it. So, for people, because you're not the only one who
Yeah.
thinks that it's like, that's one reason I want to make like a workbook for people is because then you can just really sit there and like ask yourself those types of questions.
Yeah. And it's so important. And we're gonna get more into how that also helps in the future, in protecting yourself and understanding your own vulnerabilities.
Hmm.
Um, but let's go back to the storytelling
Hmm.
of someone who is predatory. How does the storytelling work? You mentioned stories like telling about people who give away their oranges for free.
Hmm. So, to really get into the storyteller techniques, I would like to use my own story. It's a bit of a longer answer, but I really would like to kind of go into my childhood and then how I ultimately met Billy as a minor, because I think going into the details of my life, not everybody is susceptible to the same story. Like, not everybody wants the same fantasy. Not everybody has the same kind of like fantasy handicaps. So I can tell people mine, which a lot of people oftentimes relate to, but it might not be everyone's, but I just think it might show it a little bit clearer if that
Sure.
works.
Yeah.
Cool. So, and feel free to like interrupt with questions along the way, but I was born into a family where my parents were actually supposed to be missionaries in Japan. And so I had a very sheltered childhood. But when I was in the fourth grade, my mom found out that my dad was addicted to porn, and that was very upsetting for her. I don't know if that would have been upsetting for everyone, but it was for her. And they ultimately got divorced instead. And this caused a pretty drastic shift in my life because what happened was, first of all, we saw my dad a lot less after that, after the divorce, but also the roles of us as kids changed. And part of that was because my mom went back to work as a single mom. So I had to become a child parent for my younger siblings. So that was a new role for me in the fourth grade that was brought into my life. But also because of different things that my mom struggles with in terms of, I'll just call it emotional immaturity, she needed new things from my sister and I. We had new purposes for her. She struggles with regulating herself. And so my sister and I kind of became her emotional confidant of sorts. And that was a new role that I never really had to do that before, but I started becoming other centered because of that. And I think a lot of the people who watch my videos are also kind of other centered and other focused. So I stopped being as self-focused on myself and it became more about her all the time, especially because my dad wasn't around. So this was a story. This is an example of a story that started being told to me. Granted, it was being told more passively, but the narrative now is that I have these roles to fulfill for my siblings and my mom. And then the other new role that was kind of presented to me in my childhood was that I was the problem child. So my sister was my mom's best friend. I was the problem child. Either way, both of us were like hyper focused on. I kind of in my head see it as like the eye of Sauron, and you're just like under the gaze of it a little bit, you know? Um, but that really, when people want to know about like why am I attracted to certain types of fantasies and why am I attracted to certain types of stories, a lot of it does come back to your childhood, yes. But this definitely set the tone for a lot of things with myself and how I thought about my role, my purpose, my how I got love. But after childhood is not just your childhood. There's also TV and movies. That's where you learn about love and you learn about roles. And then ultimately later on, it's also your relationship with peers and your romantic relationships. I would also say porn is a type of storytelling that people don't always examine. So this was the initial storytelling that was going on in my life that started to make me vulnerable to a predator and to predatory people, not just as a child, but also into adulthood, which is what I really want people to understand. If a child can be vulnerable in these types of ways, being other-centered, thinking they're a problem, thinking things about them are innately flawed, you continue to carry those beliefs into adulthood. They don't just go away if you don't examine them. And this is why adults can be groomed as well for insidious purposes. So that was going on. That narrative was constantly around me, and my self-esteem obviously tanked. I also think that this was where secretiveness started in my life that I think a lot of people also struggle with, but maybe don't know that they do. And when I talk about that, what I mean is that I no longer was safe to like be myself. When I was my natural self as a person, my mom got upset. When I was who I naturally was as a person, fights happened. When I was who I naturally was as a person, I got demeaned and belittled. So I now am learning to withhold who I naturally am, to shift who I naturally am as a person in front of her. And that is a type of secretiveness that people might not know that they're walking around doing. Like there are times and places to, you don't just walk around giving everyone your 100% authentic self. I understand that. But sometimes people, because of these experiences in childhood or adulthood, feel like they can never fully be themselves ever. Um, and overcoming that is really important. I think that aside from the secretiveness, I also stopped exploring myself and the things that I enjoy because I started just assuming everything about this was defaulty, broken, damaged, worthless. So I had some hobbies as a child, but there definitely was a lack of like if the inner part of you is a garden that you're growing, I can see now in hindsight how far behind my peers I was. They were all growing their gardens, cultivating their interests, cultivating their inner self because they feel good about who they are. That's really getting grown. And I was not doing that in the same way. I wasn't connecting with myself in the same way. If anything, I was trying to disconnect a lot from myself, and that became very normal. I feel like it's almost like a kind of cognitive dissonance, but it's deeper than that. It's almost like a dissonance in your nature. And I don't know if there's like a word for that.
Yeah.
Um, and so it's just very interesting because a lot of these things that went on in my childhood happened with the predator that I met when I was 13. So I was obviously in a lot of emotional pain. Um, the last thing I did want to touch on for what my mom did that normalized me and primed me for a predator and kind of someone exploitive is I don't think people understand sometimes that people, what I've noticed is the people in my life I've encountered who are more emotionally mature, they kind of only really have like one mode of operating between children and adults. They don't really understand that there's um, a layer between what is inappropriate and appropriate for a child. Like what you would say to an adult, you wouldn't necessarily like say to a child. I've seen that, but the other thing I see that they do in this issue of not being able to differentiate children and adults is the same mechanisms for how they kind of like abuse adults is also what they do with kids. And what I'm trying to get at is their need to rearrange people. So my mom needed to rearrange me, rearrange my personality, like internally rearrange me so that she could feel regulated and feel okay. And that's what a lot of exploitive people do. If you think about yourself as like a house, someone who's more manipulative or emotionally immature might walk into that house inside of you and you have it decorated a certain way. You have your interests, you have your beliefs, you have your goals and your set personality. And they walk in and they go, no, this does not work for me. We need to move that over here. We need to move this over here. They just start rearranging you because it's almost like a type of emotional rigidity that they can't tolerate those differences that make them unhappy. Or in Billy's case, he needed to rearrange me so that I would be the type of girl, porn star girl, that he needed me to be. But either way, this phenomenon of being rearranged became very normal to me, first because of my mom, and then later because of a predator. And that's another really kind of like unhealthy habit I had going into life later as well, is I just expected people to want to rearrange me. That was just a part of dating. That was a part of being in relationships, is someone telling me what I needed to change and who I needed to be so that they could be happy.
And Erin, you're talking about encounters with a man named Billy. To clarify, that man was a pedophile, had already been to prison, and then found you.
Yes. So I had all this going on with my mom, and because I was in a lot of emotional pain, really unhappy, I went on my flip phone and there were free trials for chat rooms on there. And I met Billy in this chat room. We ended up exchanging phone numbers when I was 13, and we ultimately ended up talking for 3 years. And Billy, my experience with my mom kind of was my initial storytelling phase. Billy really was my experience in learning about sex and sex related to love. and how I should think about myself sexually as a woman. So that's almost like the next layer of myself that formed. I'd never had a boyfriend before him. I'd never kissed. I'd never held anybody's hand or anything like that. And with him, I feel like it basically skipped ahead 15 steps to where pretty soon after starting to talk to him, he told me a website to go to watch some pretty graphic porn. And then after I watched it, it was very disturbing to me. It made me cry. And he told me that that meant that something was wrong with me because normal straight girls liked all this type of material, no matter what it was in it. And I believed him because I already believe something's wrong with me. I do think Billy was sort of my first experience in like addiction as well. If you look at the nature of addiction, it's basically pain driving you towards a decision. That's how I see it. Any person who's an addict and has struggled with any sort of addiction at all, you're in pain. You'd have no tools for how to deal with that pain. And so the only thing you really do is just let it drive you towards finding anything that will make it better. And Billy, I think, was my first like kind of addict experience because I was in pain and I found him.
Yeah. And were you going to continue with the story?
Yeah, I
I just wanted
can.
to give
Okay.
context for this name, Billy.
Yeah, I wasn't sure whether to keep going or not. So, okay, yeah. Um, so now I am struggling with a plethora of things. I'm essentially like hollowed out as a person. I don't really have a strong sense of self because of my mom and now also him continuing to demoralize me, tell me, how I'm weird as a girl sexually. I'm learning from him and from the porn that in order to be enough as a woman, I should not have like emotional needs and I should be down for anything, kind of the porn star trope and the cool girl trope kind of like mixed together. The porn star trope, in my opinion, is something that is one of the strongest tropes that's kind of like held me hostage throughout my life. It's one that I've tried to identify with and be, but very unsuccessfully. Porn star trope doesn't have like biological issues or deficiencies, and I've always had GI issues and stuff like that. So it's been very stressful for me, like that I might not be able to provide enough sex in a relationship because of my own limitations. And if I can't give the man what he needs, then he has the right to cheat on me. Just very illogical things that are kind of removed from reality. Um, After talking to Billy for 3 years, I did end up driving down to Texas to meet him. My mom kicked me out when I was 16. I moved in with my dad and eventually got my driver's license. And once I had a car, I did decide to go down and meet him. And I really thought that this was love. After everything I'd been through with him, as tumultuous as it had been, he would make me feel dirty. He would make me feel bad about myself. I would stop talking to him. Then I would get lonely. I would have no tools for how to deal with the pain, just like a typical addict. So I go back to him because I'm awkward and I don't really know how to engage with the boys around me in my life. And I'm still pretty sheltered. Um,
And it seems that this is part of the dynamic that these sort of people try to set up too. I mean,
mhm,
I've heard the phrase from the woman who was married to the Wolf of Wall Street, Nadine Macaluso. She said something
mhm.
like, "Your tormentor becomes your soother." So
Yeah,
they try to knock you into this cycle where
yeah.
you're falling down, and then you need to keep reaching back to them to get picked back up.
Yes. And I think that's why I have a video that kind of talks about how to build your own plumb line.
Hmm.
And when I talk about a plumb line, it's basically like having something to measure everything against to know whether it's straight and true and what you're actually looking for, to what you originally wanted before you got into the fog of this mess that maybe you're in. But anyway, I think it's so important to build your own plumb line because that's you learning to soothe yourself. That's you learning to turn to yourself for answers to re-regulate because our habit is to turn to the other person. You can't feel okay until they've given you an answer with which half the time is a lie. So but you're desperate for anything because you have no tools. I really compare it to like being handicapped. Everything is
Hmm.
weakened inside of you. Like think about people who've been in a car accident or something, and there's some sort of injury that happens where you have to go to physical therapy to re-strengthen that body part. You have I had seriously neglected myself. I only used other people to find a sense of self. I used other people as a hobby. I used other people to regulate myself. I mean, that's a lot of seriously weakened inner muscles that need to be rebuilt, and that does not happen overnight. And a journal is a really powerful way of figuring out how to get back to home base and making yourself home base, not them, basically.
Yeah, this is another one of your excellent metaphors. This car accident idea, and I think an encounter with a predator, and
Mm.
it is like a physical issue in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And you've talked about some different strategies, things that people can look into when they are basically rehabbing all of those injuries. I've actually I've jotted a few of these down because I thought they were worth discussing. One is oversharing, and we can come back to your story, I think, but maybe this is
Yeah.
a good point to sort of
Yeah.
take the off ramp, and we'll come back. So
Hmm.
one is oversharing.
Hmm. Yeah. Yes, oversharing I think was super normal to me. This might sound funny. I mean, it is kind of funny, but I remember I was seeing a therapist and I didn't really there was another way I was secretive in my addiction. I didn't really talk to people about my dating experiences because I figured they were kind of unhealthy. And so I just got used to not really talking to people about them. But I went into therapy one day and I'd had a really bad first date because I did this. And the guy was like, he did not know what to do. So I was talking to my therapist about that, and she was like, no, 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 no. And I literally did not know. I know that probably sounds crazy. I didn't know. I mean, I'm not on other dates with other people. You know what I mean? Like, I
Yeah.
don't freaking know like how they do it out there in the wild. So when she was just like horrified, she was just like, no. And one of the things she kept emphasizing is you want them to get to know you as you, not your trauma, not like what you feel like is baggage. Like, yes, those things are there, and eventually you can share them once you know they're safe. But initially, like, just it's you. And I remember thinking, like, what else am I going to talk about? Okay, that's all I really had though. So like that's stressful. And that's the other thing I try to talk to when I meet fellow what I call like survivor sisters, but this applies for men too. Like if you're in the habit of oversharing or essentially trauma bonding, you know, there's this idea I think of like, oh, small talk is stupid. And like I don't know. I'm above small talk. I don't do small talk. I don't do shallow talk. Like there's no purpose for that. And it's not true. And I think to have this idea in your mind that only having deep conversations with strangers and deeper than that, but like giving all these really important parts of your story to a stranger. I mean, I'm sure all of us have done that. And then even with a friend, a possible future friend, it doesn't always work out. So it feels really shitty after you've like given that part of yourself to someone. And then for whatever reason, like you don't end up becoming friends or you don't end up dating. It's something for later. So there actually is a purpose for small talk, one of which is just safety, but also like you should learn how to have boring conversations with people. They're not actually boring, but do you know how to be less stimulated in conversation? Do you know how to let people just kind of talk about their day? And do you know how to actually be genuinely interested in those things? Or are you only interested in their life when there's something juicy happening that kind of gives you a little bit of a dopamine hit too? Do you know how to be there with people when life is kind of mundane and less interesting than an Instagram reel and actually like do that with them and do those types of dialogues with them?
It's funny to me to hear you say this because I assume this first date you had been already a high fashion model. So to say that comparing your life as inferior to an Instagram reel, it seems ironic since your life had been in photos and things like that. Um,
Yeah. And that's one of those things that I actually don't tell people about either when I'm on dates because I started getting treated like so differently.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I don't want to be making too many complex points all over the place, but the other thing people do without meaning to is we kind of tropify each other a little bit without meaning to. So, like
Yeah.
pedestal roles,
Yeah.
which I can get into the storyteller techniques now, but pedestal roles are something that I think a lot of us are becoming desensitized to and are like doing with celebrities, doing sometimes with each other. Like when I tell people I have a YouTube channel, they're just like, oh, wow, and
Mm.
it doesn't even have that many followers. But when I modeled, I absolutely was getting put on a pedestal by people, even my own family,
Yeah.
and they stopped treating me like a person. They didn't mean to, but it's almost like when you find out somebody has cancer and you're just like, oh, um, you don't, it's like you don't know what to talk to them about now, but they are still alive and walking around and they would like to play Scrabble. They can still play Scrabble while they have cancer. And I would like to play Scrabble while I'm, in magazines and doing Calvin Klein photo shoots. Like I love Scrabble. So there comes this idea of like, oh, these people are like over here, and then these people are like over here. And we kind of create like caricatures out of each other sometimes. And we do this with even the idea of like a narcissist and a psychopath too. We're like, oh, they're like all the way over here and they're all evil. And I've had friends who are narcissists, as crazy as that sounds. Like I prefer to try to live in nuance now. Like my mom has a cluster B personality disorder. What does that relationship look like now? Is it complicated? Yes. But for me personally, if you just walk around like cutting people off cold turkey all the time, like all the time, you're not necessarily learning how to have like stronger boundaries, because I think where you grow stronger boundaries is when people are not all the way in your life. Maybe they're like here, you know what I mean? Like pretty far away. That's a really complex, interesting fence to have to build versus just like this cement wall. Everybody goes behind it. You don't think about them anymore. You don't really process it. You can do that. And there are times where you need to do that. But because I didn't have good boundaries and I didn't know how to have good boundaries, and because I was putting people in all good and all bad categories, there was really no nuance in my life. And my boundaries also reflected that, where you were either all in or all out. You were all good, all bad, evil, over glorified. Nobody's all good, dude. Like there's no all good person out there. So what qualities you need to ask yourself, like what qualities are deal breakers? What qualities are you willing to accept that, yeah, maybe they're kind of painful. I'm not even talking about cluster B anymore. I'm just talking about like a person. Like what are you willing to tolerate and like handle and engage with other people that maybe is difficult for you, and what is like truly kind of a deal breaker.
Hmm. And you're getting at the danger of black and white thinking too, which is something I've heard you discuss in your videos. It makes you vulnerable
Yeah,
to someone who is trying to manipulate you as well, correct?
yeah. Yes, and I think we're all very offended when someone waters us down to like, because splitting can show up in a lot of areas. It's actually really crazy, like how much splitting showed up in my life. And again, I might be stretching the term a little bit, but I do
Well,
kind
let's clarify. We said
yeah,
black and white thinking, and now you're saying splitting, which I think can be more of a
they're like the
medicalized
same, aren't
term.
they? I
Well,
don't
let's
know.
for people who don't know.
Okay. Yeah. Black and white thinking and splitting, or whichever one, is where you are kind of doing that. You're making something all one thing or all another. Wouldn't you say that's pretty much how
I
you would define
I,
it?
I've heard splitting is more medicalized and that it's more common in people with cluster B personality disorders, particularly borderlines, in that there's an initial infatuation. You are all good. They're obsessed with you.
Yeah.
If you are their closest sort of best friend. Now,
Hmm.
I'm not a psychologist,
No, it's cool.
but
Me either.
their best friend, their lover, something like that. But
Yeah.
then eventually you will be seen as all bad. That is
Yeah.
the splitting of a relationship with someone with borderline personality disorder.
And what I find that, so that might be true because I don't freaking know. But if that is true and that's specific to borderline, isn't it interesting that we, as people with non-cluster B personality disorders, I have done that
Hmm.
in my life.
Yeah.
Maybe not in the exact same way,
Yeah.
but I guess I just kind of like trying to see how we're not all so vastly different. I
Mm.
understand some people might feel upset by that. Not everybody might like that. This is just me. You know what I mean? Like these are the things I've tried to figure out to do for myself to heal a little bit.
Yeah.
And I was so afraid. I think because of kind of the black and white thinking, I was so afraid that if I really looked in the mirror and I saw any similarities to my mother, I would go in this all bad category. I was terrified of that. That means I'm her. Like there was such
Hmm.
a lack of nuance in that really like handicapped me, where I was just like, I don't know how to look at any of this stuff because of course I have similarities to the woman. I freaking lived with her for 16 years of my life. You know what I mean? Like,
Right.
yeah. But um just really trying to understand like what are the differences, what are the similarities, and a lot of it comes down, I think, to intention too.
Hmm.
I would see similarities between myself and the people I was with who kind of exploited me. And that really freaked me out. But I needed to look at that because you pick up a lot of the unhealthy habits, like lying. You know what I mean? But you have to lie. I'm not saying it's okay, but I'm just saying people lie for different reasons. So this person over here was lying to exploit me, to weave a web and create a trap. I, for example, in a different way, lied to survive, to get out of the relationship, to stay safe. So there's the behaviors and then there's the intention behind them. And I think with my black and white thinking, it's just that I really did not know any other way to think from being with my mom, from being with a lot of people who think like this. And now that I've found ways to explore nuance and try to live in nuance, that's been very healing for me. It's like a medicine that I needed. And that's not, it hasn't been super hard for me. So I just think it's kind of, I don't know, important sometimes to look at those similarities and realize that you still get to choose who you are when you wake up every single morning. You get to
Hmm.
choose what you do with yourself, the choices that you make. We're all working on becoming better people. We're all starting from different places, but not everybody's getting up and trying to go on that journey with themselves. So it's very important to have grace with yourself and all the different quirky, frustrating, just really specific like issues you can have going on internally sometimes.
Yeah.
And a lot of survivors have a lot of shame that makes them not want to talk about any of the stuff that they've done in their addiction. That's a huge thing that I've seen meeting different survivors. We tell each other because we're like, you're going to get it. You're not going to judge me. You've done something similar. You kind of trust that that person can handle the information, especially when you relapse, when you go back.
Yeah.
A lot of people, when I got away from Billy, this went on for 3 years, drove down to Texas, met him. He basically held me hostage in his house for an entire weekend. I didn't know if I was getting home. I fawned the crap out of that situation. And it's funny because some people will be like, you should have kicked and screamed. And I'm like, no, I'm pretty sure that's how I would have died. So, no. But even after that, there's this hope with me, with my family. There's this hope that it will never happen again, not just the rape, but me engaging with a person predatory and abusive like that. There's the desperate hope that it won't happen again. And the thing is, it probably will. And we have to learn through mistakes. And that's very hard for our friends and family to go through with us. And I totally understand that. But there is such an aspect of secretiveness in this stuff for lots of different reasons. And one of those is because you pick up these crazy habits, you're relapsing all the time. It's a messy journey of recovery. So,
Yeah. Yeah, you're reminding me of conversations I've had with people who are in the cult space, people who are cult deprogrammers or people who are cult
mhm.
defectors, and they talk about how changed they are by the situation as well. Something
Yeah.
similar. So we've branched off quite a ways
Yeah.
from your initial story, but we've got pieces of it
Yeah.
as we've gone on. We've got sort of this event with Billy when you're 16, and
Mhm.
we branched off to talk about how that's like a car accident, some of the muscles
Yeah.
you need to rebuild. Talked about oversharing.
Yeah.
How about self-neglect? It seems you're already starting to touch on that one a little bit.
That can show up in so many different ways. I mean, mine would even happen in how I ate.
Yeah.
Like, if I was really busy or stressed, I was just the last priority in everything. And I see that with a lot of my friends who are moms. The kids
Hmm.
get fed, the laundry gets done, the house looks beautiful, and they have literally not eaten all day because everything else is a priority and not them. It can show up in a lot of different areas, but food is always really interesting to me because it's one of the most basic necessities that we need. And, if you can't even feed yourself properly, what other areas are you neglecting yourself in? I also think just making yourself a priority in terms of, like I said, rebuilding yourself. Part of rebuilding yourself and the idea of self-neglect is like I would only let myself be interested in what the other person was interested in because a few times when I told people things that I enjoyed or liked, that was kind of diminished. I was told it was stupid. You know what I mean? I dated really like hyper intellectual people. So if I wanted to watch a rom-com, that was just insane. So I think the self-neglect also came in terms of like actually letting myself live in my interests, enjoy the things that I like enjoying, not just doing the things that they enjoy and trying to be their like mirror back kind of. And then sex, I think, is a really important area. I can't speak for men, but I know for women, it's a little controversial, but I just find it very interesting that the ways I was indoctrinated to be sexually as a woman by a predator, I see a lot of women kind of having the same habits now because of porn. And I think just dating culture in general. I'm not saying you can have whatever sex drive you want as a woman. It's about how we prioritize ourselves in the relationship. In this idea of self-neglect, like if you're sick, if you literally physically don't are not able to or do not want to engage in these things, and then you're making yourself do it anyway, that's self-neglect for sure.
Yeah, and it touches on another thing that you've listed too, which is a fawning sort of response. So there's not trusting your opinions.
Mhm.
What's the significance of that as a muscle to rebuild?
Well, if you can't trust your own opinions, how are you going to get out of the relationship when it gets really bad? How are
Hmm.
you going to believe that he shouldn't hit you when he always has a because? There is always a because. And one of the part, I have like six or seven different things that your plumb line should consist of if you're trying to like journal for yourself. First of all, the plumb line is done alone. You're not doing this with them. Like that literally defeats the purpose. You're not going to like ask them if they're a liar. You're not going to ask a liar if they're a liar. You're not doing that. You're going to keep notes for yourself to form an opinion slowly over time if you think this person is a liar or not. And there's even videos I've watched by CIA people who are like, we have to do this in the field when we're like an undercover agent. They like have one guy said he kept marbles in a jar because they have to stay grounded. You start to care about these people that you're trying to get information from. We're human, you're in the fog. So,
Yeah, just to clarify that, I remember your video on that, and you were citing it was an interview with Andrew Bustamante and Lisa
mhm.
Bilyeu, and Andrew was talking about how some field agents keep a bag of marbles and two jars for when they think that the person is being honest or dishonest in their interactions, so that because you can get confused, but at
Yes.
least you can physically see this
Yeah.
reminder. Oh, that's a lot.
Yes. And so you can do that journaling too. I
Yeah.
literally do this. I call it my green and red pebbles. That's what I call it.
Hmm.
And anytime there's a red pebble, I note it. I email it to myself. And then anytime there's a green pebble, I note it to myself. And I just see over time, what's growing. But this is how you start to form your own opinion. I
Hmm.
actually think forming a sense of self and learning how to form your own opinions is like the most difficult thing for us. Forming your own opinion is so scary. And I understand that it actually takes courage. I have felt that fear because the fear is what if I actually form the wrong opinion and then I lose this person who's so special, even though he cheats on me and even though he puts me down all the time, he is so special to me. He is, and he genuinely is. So you feel like you're about to lose like a demigod in your life because that's
Yeah.
what you turned this person into.
Yeah.
That's terrifying. You feel like you're jumping off a ledge with no parachute, you
Hmm.
know? So the marble thing or the green and red pebble thing is really important. The other thing with the plumb line that could be really helpful for people is to notate which events you're keeping secret in the relationship.
Hmm.
Because first of all, you'll
Keeping
start,
secret from others?
yeah, your family and friends.
Oh, okay.
So if you start seeing, because you'll lie to yourself, dude, you will first of all, you'll forget like everything. So this is almost like when you go into a cave and there's like a rope, this is your in rope, dude, to get back out.
Hmm.
So you need to, first of all, just notate the events. But when you really start seeing like how much you're keeping a secret from your friends and family, you can't lie to yourself, and it's truly shocking. But this whole list is very helpful later because there will come a time when you've endured so much that you finally do talk to your trusted friends and family about it, whoever that is. And when you do, you need to actually be able to remember the things that have happened to discuss it with them. And I've had this happen where I want to talk to them about it and I'm all over the place because it's all disappeared. And I'm like, I know that there's things that happened in the beginning, but I can't really remember what they were. And it just kind of becomes all over the place and you can't really get that feedback that you need. So the list helps for several different reasons because of that. And usually the stuff you're keeping secret, that's the stuff they're going to want to know about that you're going to want to talk to them about. So keeping that list um, is really helpful. And then also with the feedback that you receive from people, which is another piece of the plumb line, is there a pattern to the feedback? I actually have a rule of three with myself. If I go to three different people and they all tell me the same thing, I actually have created a rule for myself where I'm like, I have to trust them by default now. Like, I trust them, and these aren't random people on the street that I'm asking. These are lifelong friends that I've had. So if three people all say the same thing to me about an event or something that happened, even if I disagree, I go with them now because there have been enough times where I was so wrong. And there's
Hmm.
also been times where I ignored my rule of three and it ended up being what was the truth later. So I've been delusional enough in my life that I now know what it feels like to rely on other people because I think the most important thing for people to understand is, for me at least, I've never gotten out of a situation solely on my own, ever. I either had these tools that helped me or people that helped me. It was never just me as an indoctrinated person, just like fully getting out and staying away on my own,
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I would agree. And that's one reason that a predatory person will try to isolate you from friends
for
as well.
sure.
But it's one of those things that's so subtle. I talked to a woman recently whose mother was in the CIA, and she said, "Oh, I'd never get into a cult or something because I would know. Like, there's this whole list. Like, they're going to try to isolate you from your friends and family." And the nuance there is that a good predator is going to make you think it's your idea. It's it's not like they're going to just one day say like, "I'm deleting your family's phone numbers."
Yeah. No, that's the best way you can do it. And also, I think the minute you say something will never happen to me, that is literally a vulnerability. The minute you
Mm.
think that you are for sure exempt from being groomed, from being manipulated, from being taken advantage of,
Hmm.
you're now very vulnerable to that happening because you're not even watching. Like if you have like a piece of armor on and there's a hole like right
Hmm.
there, and you're like, there's no hole. You're not even watching it now, dude. You're not even monitoring that area. That's
Yeah.
like not good.
Yeah. This is another one of your metaphors, Aaron. What is all this with the metaphor for you? Does it come from something, someone around you who's taught you this, or an influence, or you just like metaphors?
I think very visually, like
Okay.
really, I actually see this stuff in my head when I'm talking about it. And
Mhm.
I think just the visual aspect of it, that's just how my brain works. It sees patterns and it paints pictures. So
So when you think about a concept in dealing with someone who's predatory, it doesn't come out as words in your head necessarily. It's images of these things, and then you are trying to express that to your audience in words.
never really had to think about how it happens before. It's just so magical and So much talent. Yeah, I don't know. It's like I see the patterns and then my brain just goes, it's just like this thing. And then I see the picture.
Uh,
It's weird, but
okay.
yeah, it's able to pull up stuff. Yeah, I think that's kind of how it happens. Yeah.
Hmm.
I hope
Have,
it's helpful though. I mean, when you really think about it, our we as people come from storytelling and storytellers, and I think that's one reason these tactics are so powerful. And I just realized that I still had not gotten to the storytelling techniques, which I need to.
that's
Um,
okay.
but yeah, we come from stories, and that's how we used to connect with people, and it's still how we connect with people. So it is, I think it's a way that you can really change lives through stories. I think it's one reason, like when I tell my story and use my story as the piece to kind of like connect all of it, it's a little bit more powerful. Um, there's lots of different ways that stories can impact us positively and negatively. And I think it's just because our brain, that's like a food for our brain. So just be careful like which food you're ingesting, because like not all food, literal food, is good for us, and not all stories are good for us either. And the other thing people I don't think are aware of is the fact that you can keep re-brainwashing yourself. So if you're already used to ideas that are not good for you, and that feels normal. And just because something feels normal doesn't mean it's actually good for you. Those are two very separate things that people just kind of make the same. But you can, if this is your normal, then we kind of look for stories that are similar to that because that's what excites us, that's what makes us feel good, that's what feels like home. So I continued to ingest material, whether porn or movies or books or experiences, that kept reaffirming that narrative for me. And I was constantly re-brainwashing myself in that way. And you can brainwash yourself. There are people who have heard my story who were never assaulted, never groomed by a person, but they were groomed by the internet. They were groomed by movies. And they say that they can relate to my story a lot because of that. So it's not just people who can do this to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I've had Rick Allen Ross on the show. He's a cult deprogrammer, and he's talked about how modern cult recruitment and the cult brainwashing is done through video often.
Mm,
It's a very effective tool. It can be scaled and it works.
it's crazy.
Yeah. To the point about stories, we were in your story, we got to age 16, we took some branches off that highway, we've come back to these different muscles to rebuild. I think we've done a good job
Mhm.
with that. What happens next in your story?
So after I was involved with Billy for 3 years and after the assault happened, I really genuinely was like, I'm good. You know what I mean? Like he's in prison. Thank God I got out of that one. And I just started kind of going through life in this, it really felt like I was on fire inside, and I was looking for any sort of medicine, any sort of experience. I think there was a lot of anger there to where I wanted to destroy my own life, but at the same time, I didn't, that kind of cognitive dissonance in a way where you want two things at the same time or believe two things at the same time. And so my life was very chaotic. I kept getting involved with men who I just found a lot of people who, even if they didn't have a literal sex addiction, they had a very high sex drive. I guess I'll just say it like that. And the way that sex was the epicenter of the relationship, obviously, relationships have sex. Obviously, relationships are intimate. There can be love. This is a way of expressing love. I'm aware of all of that. But it was the epicenter of the relationship. And if it was not there, the relationship absolutely would have fallen apart if there was a break, if it didn't happen in the way that they wanted, if it didn't happen at the frequency that they wanted it. I don't believe any of those people would have stayed. And that was just kind of what I went through life doing. And I was very unhappy and I was very lonely and very stressed out in a lot of my relationships. And then when I was 19, I got on a plane and flew to New York and signed a modeling contract without reading it. And I did that for 3 years.
One thing I've missed in that story, So, but we don't just get on planes and fly to New York and then find modeling contracts waiting for us.
Yeah.
So did somebody, just discover you?
I was scouted, yeah, in the area where I live, I was scouted and I had a
Yeah.
shaved head at the time, so they were like, "Oh yeah, crazy." And I was literally a maid and they plucked me out of maidhood
Yeah.
and ABC News was filming stuff for them at the time, so I had a really crazy start. I Do you know who Ira Glass is?
Yeah.
I was sitting next to him on the plane. Like he's talking to me, asking me what I'm doing. I don't listen to podcasts, so I don't know who he is. So I'm just like, whatever, homie. And then we exchanged numbers. We ended up becoming friends. So that's how I started out going to New York. Then ABC News was like waiting for me when I got off the plane. You know, to go into the storyteller techniques a little bit through this example, the first part of the storyteller techniques is that you are cased for your vulnerabilities.
Mm.
But then after you're cased and they figure out what your vulnerabilities are, you're presented with a role. And most of the time, it's the special one, the most special one.
Yeah.
And in the world of modeling, I'm sure it's true for other creative areas as well, but in the world of modeling, you're always the most special one. As long as you play by the rules, do what you're told, I wasn't good at that. So I fell off that pedestal a lot. I kind of call that a pedestal role. And you're up here and they're up here because they're obviously super special too. Both of you are like really special. Um, and you're kind of set up with a flaw sometimes, not always. There's different like pedestal roles you can have. Sometimes it's like the best helper, like you're
Yeah.
the best caretaker
Yeah.
and they're actually the one with the flaw. And then because you're codependent, that kind of like holds you hostage. They're like this helpless child, and you
Hmm.
can't ever like leave them because you're like the best caretaker and they need you to caretake. So there's definitely different types of roles that can come in, but when it comes time for them to start controlling you, they knock you off that pedestal. And that's very painful for you if you feel like you need to be up there, like you can't lose that special
Yes.
title. So within modeling, there was a lot of me being like knocked off the pedestal, trying to get back on it, knocked off the pedestal. And I had a very weak sense of self. So I was just trying to do whatever people wanted me to do to be really cool and accepted. And that was very like chaotic for me as well. Yeah.
Well, and you were, a fish out of water too. I've
Yeah.
seen the bit with you with Dan Harris from ABC,
Mhm.
and it's the way that the clip that I saw ends is, oh, and by the way, this girl shows up with like $300 in her pocket in New York City and thinks she's going to be okay, and that's that's not how it works.
They filmed me on a bench. They were like, "We need to do some B-roll. Can you just like sit on this bench?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, okay, yeah." I just like sat on the bench. They talk about me being really sad, and then you see me sitting on this bench all alone in a park, and that's like how they used it. I didn't know how they were going to use it. It was
Mhm.
just so funny. I was like, "That's why you had me sit on the bench?" Okay. So yeah, it was interesting. I definitely learned a lot.
Yeah.
Um,
That is such a vulnerable situation. And to this idea of the roles, it's really important, I think, that people understand that when you encounter someone like this, they're going to talk you into these roles. That's what they're
mhm,
trying to do.
mhm.
And the role has the flaw built in so
Hmm.
that they can knock you off at will
Yeah.
whenever it's time, and then they can give it back. We talked about how the tormentor becomes a soother. They can
Hmm.
knock you off the pedestal and then they can put you back because they're the judge. So if you find yourself in a role where someone is distributing criticism and praise and
Mm.
you start to sense this, it's very
Hmm.
important to watch out for the roles, to not accept the roles. What else?
Um, yeah, they want to become, first of all, if you don't let them become the narrator, they don't stick around. So you
Mhm.
also have to be okay with being discarded. Like that was terrifying for me. And I
Mhm.
actually remember the period of time where I remember the first time I got discarded and I literally did like a little dance on my couch because I was able to see that like what I lost wasn't anything valuable. And they showed me who they were. So I was able to flip my logic and not be afraid of that thing and actually kind of like celebrate it a
Yeah.
little bit. So being okay with being discarded is absolutely a part of this because when you don't let them become the narrator of your life, and when you also, because they really do want to be considered the most special pretty early on, they like need that a lot of times. So when you're like, I don't know how I feel about you yet, I'm still trying to figure it out. I go kind of slow, when you're not just like giving them that answer, most of the time they leave. So that's just kind of a piece of it. Yeah.
Yeah, I would add that in the situation that most comes to mind for me, I had cognitive dissonance. I didn't know what exactly
Hmm.
the deal was with this person because I'd just been in the throes for so long. And it was when the discard was so blatant that I realized, oh, something's very wrong with him. Something
Hmm.
is strange here. And then I went to a friend who's a doctor, and she had been suspicious of him for a while. She had diagnosed him effectively,
Hmm.
and I told her I think something's way off here. And
Yeah.
she said I didn't want to alienate you, but
Hmm.
this is what's going on with this guy and stuff. And it was so eye-opening at that ending.
I do find it interesting. Like, I never know what to want from therapists with that because we do need to learn to reach our own conclusions on our own. And it's not their job to, like, you know, but sometimes I'm just like, dang, you should have keyed me in a little bit. But would I have believed it? I don't know. So that's very true. I also think, I don't know if you experienced this with this person, but the idea, like I kind of referenced earlier, of like them wanting to rearrange you, or, like there's very early on, usually it kind of goes in with the brokenness a little bit, but this idea of like nitpicking kind of, and what could almost be called like a drip campaign
Oh,
of tiny comments of things like that. They're already showing sort of a lack of tolerance with certain aspects of you, and that's important to pay attention to.
yes, in my situation, the nitpicking was by design. This man
Hmm.
put himself in a teacher mentor role with everyone around him. He has an excellent skill set. And
Yeah.
so it allowed him to be constantly distributing criticism and praise to everyone and to be the authority. And then he would isolate people. He would tell people, "Oh, that person, they're not so good. You want to stay away from them." And then
Hmm.
that person, "Why doesn't so and so talks to me?" So that he would be the filter for everyone on what reality was and
Hmm.
use that to tear you down, build you back up. And the most obedient people would continue to thrive in
Hmm.
his system. And it
Hmm.
it worked devastatingly well.
Yeah, I mean, that's the other part of kind of I won't use splitting, but black and white thinking that we can pick up
Mhm.
is to actually become an effective flying monkey of
Yes.
sorts.
Yes.
You have to agree with their perspective, obviously. So that's another way that you kind of get, especially if you're in these relationships like long term, you have to be loyal to their mindset. So whoever's dead to them also has to be dead to you. Whoever's completely in their life, you have to be completely okay with. So it's just another way that you learn to kind of think in black and white terms like that too. We have to be allowed to like have our own relationships with people and our own opinions about them. And we have to let our friends be able to do that too. I sometimes see that with survivors. It's just kind of an unhealthy habit that's there that we all need to work on getting rid of, where it's like, I can still be your friend and not completely cut off this person that you've cut off. And I'm not like somehow being a bad friend in that way?
Yeah. Yeah, back to the cult model. One thing that people who get out of cults say that if you want to know if something is or isn't, look at whether people can leave without drama. Can they
Mm,
leave but still be, acceptable? And in the case of people who have the black and white thinking or have been trained to the black and
yeah.
white thinking or recruited for their black and white thinking, they're
Hmm.
very easy to turn for the smear campaign. Oh,
Yeah.
he was good. No, now he's bad. And you need to go on behalf of the predator and
Yes.
tell others and get others involved and make sure that they're isolated and nobody get close with that person who's on the outside. And people think
Hmm.
they're doing it for themselves, but really the predator is just trying to keep a hold on their circle.
If you want to really test someone early on in dating, and I think testing is more than fine. Like there are some people who are like, we should never test people. I'm like, I test them all the time. I don't even care. Like whatever. Say no. Say no to some stuff and
Mm,
see how they react.
mm.
Also, like I've also discovered this interesting thing where they list a flaw about themselves. So they've said it. And then I later reiterate it back to them. Well, now because it's coming out of my mouth and it's a different period of time, it's really interesting, but a lot of times they act like they didn't say it. They argue with you about it, even if you're saying literally the thing that they said. It's very strange, but interesting. And I've just, like, again, I don't like immediately cut someone off because of that, but I've just noticed this idea of like when they say it, it's okay. When you say it, it's no longer okay. A lot of times when you're talking about a fight that happened or something they did that upset you, they'll say it in that moment and it's fine. Anytime after that, out of your mouth, not okay. And you get like all these different weird verbal reactions.
I
So,
bet. Yeah. Erin, in your story, so we've got to 19 years old. You get on the plane, New York City,
mhm.
modeling contract. In the lens of this interview, is there more that you want to say about that experience or something else along your storyline?
No, I don't think so. I mean, we're living in a world of like almost famous people, and I definitely had like an almost famous experience. And it can definitely leave you wondering like who you are afterwards if you don't have a strong sense of self. So I do feel bad for anyone nowadays who is struggling with that, maybe was almost famous and then isn't now. You have to understand your worth doesn't come from that stuff anyway. So,
Yeah. Yeah. And on that too, you'd hit on the roles. One other thing, another phrase that you used that I thought was great in describing the
mhm.
roles is the idea of a royal couple
Yeah.
in the roles. And that's something to watch out for too. Something that I've seen. And it can be romantic, it can be the king and the queen, but it can
Mhm.
also be between friends. It's the king and the prince,
Yeah.
that sort of thing. But you are somehow elevated, and yet the flaw is built in so that you can be bumped out of the court or brought back in at will.
Yeah.
But that royal couple thing really hit home with me.
Yes. I definitely think that's almost like an archetype of sorts that
Yeah.
we look for in celebrities and all this other stuff. I think I also kind of touched on in that video for a while, I didn't want to be like these people in any kind of way. So I thought I needed to like hate myself to be the opposite of them, as maybe strange as that sounds, but I've come to understand now that like I'm not going to lose my sense of self by gaining confidence. Like confidence is not the issue. And you can have a sort of like false humility through really just hating yourself and then thinking that that's what humility is. And it's not. Humility is having confidence, knowing who you are, being grounded, but not thinking that you're better than other people while having that like inner work that you've done.
Baron, with the storyline, do you want to take it further?
I don't think so. I mean, the rest of my life, I feel like I've kind of touched on in lots of different ways from lots of different aspects. I uh, I feel like over the last 3 to 4 years, everything that I've been realizing, it's just been a really cool journey. And I'm sure I get comments on my YouTube channel sometimes where they're like, this is very neurotic. And I'm just like, okay, well, yes, because it's a new skill. You know what I mean? It's not like you have to do this all the time forever. It's just new tools to kind of pick up that after a while become more like second nature. I'm not like grilling people on dates anymore. I actually used to do that. I don't do that anymore because I know myself better and I trust that I'm going to be able to keep that person out of my metaphorical yard because I have these fences built up. It's not just cement walls where they're either all in or all out, and I can't see over the wall and I can't hear very well, and my vision's limited. Like, I have all these different types of fences built, so I can go into these dates much more relaxed and grounded. And I don't even really date that much, but when I'm engaging with people, I guess I'll say it that way, whether I'm in the workplace or meeting people or wherever it is, I can go about my day much more relaxed because I trust myself to not let people into my yard too soon, but also just to be observant in the ways that I need to be observant. And it doesn't take a lot of effort anymore because it has kind of become second nature. And I would love that to happen for other people too.
Mhm. You're talking about building new skills after an experience like this. One thing that I've also heard you talk about is that there are lasting effects, that if you're groomed once, you can be more vulnerable in the future.
Yeah.
So could we talk a little bit about what some of those lasting effects are?
hmm I mean, we kind of touched on some of them, just with the oversharing and the phrasing and fawning and stuff, but I think it's also some of the other things I referenced with being other focused so
Mm,
heavily, not having that sense of self. Your dopamine levels it's really hard when you first start kind of detoxing from this stuff because honestly, your dopamine threshold is like so high. Life does feel boring for a while, and life does feel a little bit emptier.
Yes.
And it can be very hard to sit in that if your window of tolerance hasn't been built up as well. So that can be very stressful. And I think if you compound that with having discarded your social network, having discarded your trusted people, it really can feel like you're building up literally yourself and your life all the way back up from the ground up. But it's not forever. You know, all these things do take time to build. These gardens take time to grow. These relationships take time to grow. You take time to grow. But I think the key thing is really finding things that you enjoy for yourself, like hobbies. That has really helped me a lot in the period of time where I felt maybe empty, felt like I didn't maybe have as many friends, felt like I was more afraid internally. If you can find just a few hobbies, it doesn't matter if anybody else likes them. It doesn't matter if somebody else thinks it's stupid. It doesn't matter. Just find some things for yourself to supplement some of that dopamine and also to give yourself a feeling of self-soothing. That can be really important, but not easy. So,
Yeah, you're connecting a lot of things here on the way that life does seem a little bit grayer after you've been in, say, the throes of being close with a narcissistic psychopath, where everything is
yeah,
drama and everything is the front row and the best seats and all of that. There's
yeah,
that. You will probably lose some, if not all, of your social network, um, and then your activities are going to change.
yeah,
So let's be like really granular on that because unfortunately, people commit suicide when they go
yeah,
through this.
yeah.
The work of Dr. Karen Mitchell, who I've had on the show, very clear on this.
Mhm.
And I've talked to people personally, anecdotally, who'll say, oh, when I got out of this, I lost the will to live.
Mhm.
I maybe they didn't commit suicide, but they just woke up every day and they thought, oh, I have to keep going. So cultivating hobbies, cultivating what maybe the friendships that have lasted, like what did that look like for you?
Yeah, it is reconnecting with people. In AA, we kind of talk about, you know, it's called doing a 10th step, but you basically are sort of apologizing for things. And it's funny because a lot of the similarities between like addiction, like to substances and addiction to a person, there can be a
Oh yeah.
lot of similarities, and relationships do get severed and broken because of this stuff. So I do think reconciling those relationships, if possible, is really important and something that you can do. You can do this, you know? And then also with the hobbies, I had to go back to like middle school and think
Mm.
about what did I like doing in middle school? Like what movies did I like watching? And again, doesn't matter if it sounds dumb. I started rewatching some of those things. You know what I mean? Like that's all I had to start with. I knew that I liked it, so I started there. I used to like photography, so I just started taking pictures in parks, you know? I really wanted to start walking around more. I didn't really like walking around the city, so I found parks to walk around and instead, like I figured out like why do I not want to do that thing even though I kind of want to do that thing and just kind of figuring out stuff like that. But I really had to go back to my earlier childhood to kind of restart.
Yeah. I've seen people comment on your videos too that they seem to supplement by watching videos. That there's a lot of behavior around watching video after video about
Yeah.
narcissistic personality disorder, things like that, and getting in that cycle. Do you see that too?
Mhm. Yes. Yeah, it is hard because like I mean, you know, it's funny when people are detoxing off alcohol, they literally have to like eat candy and stuff
Oh
sometimes
yeah.
to supplement the sugar.
Yeah.
So I'm not saying like I've even talked about this in my video on like addiction to abuse. Sometimes you do have to have short-term supplements. Just don't make sure those turn into like your new addiction. But it's really trying to find the long-term supplements and replacements. And it can be so overwhelming, but I think there's literally videos on like how to make friends. There's literally videos on like how to find a meetup group for
Yeah.
something you're interested in. Like shift the thing that you're doing on the YouTubes, shift it to a different thing that has to do with like building skills, you know, not just living in this fear-based world I understand it's important to process the evil stuff that you just came out of because it is very confusing. But after a certain point, move away from the grave. There is a grave. You are allowed to visit it. Don't live there. Move away, go back to your life, and you can come back from time to time and feel that sorrow and really grieve what has been lost. But don't stay there. It's not good.
Yeah. You used the word evil. I want to talk about evil and the spiritual element that you see in this. But talking about getting in all these videos is reminding me of a question from one of our listeners whose username is at just striving for that lil narc PhD, which I assume means when people talk about getting the PhD in NPD, you get
Yeah.
away and then you think, oh, I got to understand what I just went through, and so you end up watching 1,000 videos and reading books
Yeah.
and all of that. And this person's question, I'll sum it up, but basically in the storytelling, this person's had
Mhm.
experience with someone using superstition to sort of
Mhm.
control them. Um, have you seen anything with superstition and manipulation? Any thoughts on that?
No, but I mean, that's very interesting. And I can literally see how that would work. You know
Hmm.
what I mean?
Yes.
Like, you're just like, yeah, of course that would work. They're using fear to control you. And if you have like religious OCD at all, or any sort of OCD tendencies around that area, oh my gosh, that's like lock and key match. Um, yeah, no, I haven't had experience with superstition, but at the same time, like fear is such a key component
Yes.
in all of this stuff. And it is looking for the similarities to know that you're not alone. It's not always about looking for the differences and comparing. So I feel that similarity without fully knowing that person's story. And again, I think that's why it's so important to journal and to write out for yourselves. Another thing that I have done is false like lies that I believe, false truths that I believe, and a lot of stuff based in fear. We don't know tomorrow, so you're already letting a future fantasy control you. Like future fantasies are very much a thing. There's past fantasies and future fantasies, lots of promises that are made as a future fantasy that we look forward to. But this was a negative future fantasy that was used to control this person. And you have to realize, like, it has not come to pass. Therefore, it is literally not true because it has not happened, just from that standpoint alone. But that's also where you can go to your trusted people, if you have them, to talk about what you're hearing and to reground yourself in reality. If you only talk to yourself and the person, that's going to seem a lot stronger and a lot more realistic when maybe it's not. So don't forget about your relationships.
Yeah. Yeah. And you said grounding yourself in reality, similar to the superstition. I've seen this person use conspiracy theories as a
Hmm.
way to shake people up. And it starts small. It's
Hmm.
that sports game. It looks like it was rigged or somebody was point shaving a little bit.
Hmm.
And it becomes bigger and bigger and bigger. And it seems they're trying to break people of their sense of what's real and testing. Maybe there's some feedback. Oh yeah, you think you know who the Antichrist is, or something like that. You've got
Hmm.
this thing figured out. Let's see how far we can get you off the ground.
Yes.
And it goes until it is literally talking about the ground and it is about flat Earth and things like that.
Mhm.
The person who I dealt with, he was sending me links at one point. Boy, you
Yeah.
should check this out. What do you think? I don't know.
Hmm.
So there's something there along the lines of superstition. What do you
Yeah.
think?
I just think all of it is, again, so many of these relationships are based in fantasy and they want to see if you will
Yeah,
join the fantasy
yeah,
with them,
yeah,
whatever that fantasy is. So, yes, you're being cased. That's an example of what casing is. I don't know if I fully fleshed out that definition, but the story I always tell is I went to basically like a conference for correctional officers and probation officers. And they told the correctional officers that they always had to make sure that their clothes were ironed before they came in. And that wasn't for appearances, that was a safety thing, because if their clothes were wrinkly, the prisoners would know that they were tired and they would know that they were more vulnerable. That's just an example of casing. Another example of casing is like that person starting out small, seeing how you react to things. They're kind of like a poke. They're poking at
yeah,
you. Are you offended by the poke? Do you let them poke you? Do you ask for personal space after they poke you? Like, what do you do and how do you engage back? Do you have any sense of self-protection? Do you have any sense of your own opinion on anything? And if they get mad at you, what do you do? Like, so you disagree with them, then they get mad. What do you do when they get mad? Do you bend over? Do you know what I mean? Do you just like fall apart? Do you actually continue to stand up for yourself? Like it's almost like stages of grief where they try different things to see which one maybe works with you. They don't just try one approach. But that is really true, how they start out small and then it grows. Yeah, and also like admitting our vulnerabilities to them. We it makes sense that we do this. I don't want anyone to be like, "Oh, I'm such a dummy" or whatever. Like we're all looking for comfort and connection and we want to vent about ourselves and the pain that we have. But if you give away too much of, your vulnerabilities too early on, you just need to be aware of the fact that you don't know yet who you're giving it to. People One of the activities I want to have in my workbook is like, how do you measure a stranger? You
Mm,
personally.
yeah.
Because a lot of people, after two, three phone conversations, they're like, not a stranger anymore. They told me about their childhood. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? We connected. They're not a stranger anymore. And it's like, you don't know
Sure.
if stories are true.
No. No.
Yeah.
No, I'm still unraveling things that were told to me that were just fantasy, that were just made up. But I had taken so many of them, the weight of them at face value that I thought,
Yes.
oh, okay, this story all checks out. And these people can build amazing facades. They can
Oh,
have
yeah.
families and circles of friends. And a
Yep.
narcissistic psychopath, a good tell can often be that they have a huge network of shallow but high status relationships. And so
Mm.
it's easy to get just blown away by that.
Yeah, that's actually one of the things I look at when I'm dating people is do they have genuine intimate relationships with anyone, their family,
Mhm.
their parents, a friend.
Mhm.
And also, if they only have like one or two friends, whatever, maybe they're introverted, but what do those friendships look like? And am I going to meet those friends? Like, there's a reason why someone is a stranger for a few months, not a few weeks. And we all have to just kind of slow down our roll. Again, different fences. So, yeah, after a month, maybe they're not at this fence anymore. Now they're at this fence, depending on what I've learned. But they're not all the way in my yard at a month. No, no way. They might be a little closer so I can learn some more things, but not all the way in my yard.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And these people are very skilled at triangulating and stalking as well. And the
Mm-hmm.
person I dealt with, he works for a data company. So if he's got your social media and he sees you around and he knows some of your friends, and then he can use his
Yep.
company resources, you add that all up, and
Mm-hmm.
it's a very fast triangulation system. And he also manages a website where people put in their address. You can ping what city they're logging in from and things like that. And some people have protections against that,
Mm-hmm.
but it stacks up very fast to have
Mm-hmm.
this amazing amount of people information on people.
Yeah. I actually, I don't know if I would ever feel comfortable dating someone who had law enforcement connections.
Mm,
Just because for myself as a survivor, like I've had to come to terms with the fact that like first of all, not everybody's for me and that's okay. And it doesn't mean there's something wrong with them, just not everybody's for me. But even deeper than that, like what am I looking for? You can have a whole list of stuff you don't want, but do you actually know like what you want and why? And I've had to kind of humble myself a little bit because I used to have a type and it was like this highly successful, blah, 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 lots of connections, whatever. And I'm a little bit more handicapped now. I don't know if I always will be, but I am for now. And if I were to meet someone, I just think it would be too stressful for me if they had like law enforcement connections or like that type of connection you're describing. I think it would just be too stressful and nerve-wracking for me to be able to like do that, at least at this point in my life, because I do get so nervous about things like that. Yeah.
that's So we touched a little bit on spirituality, evil. I know this is
Mhm.
important for you. This is something that comes up sometimes in the comments on these interviews. What do you think about the spiritual aspect of dealing with people like this?
So, I believe in God and I am a Christian. And for me, the reason I am religious and the reason I believe in good and evil is because I've met evil and I know that evil is real. And I also believe in God because there's been many, many miraculous experiences that have happened for me getting out of some of these situations. I mean, truly miraculous. And if anyone does want to create a plumb line for themselves, I would really encourage prayer because there have been times that I have prayed for an answer to something and I had dreams that revealed
Mm.
things to me that I found out later were true. I'm just saying don't knock the spirit world because it can really help you. For me, that's my belief. And prayer can be a really powerful tool. I've realized things that felt truly miraculous to realize that got me out of some of my brainwashing. But evil is absolutely real. And I think if there are people who aren't sure if they believe in evil, maybe they just haven't met it. But just because you haven't experienced something doesn't mean that it's not out there and it's not accessible as an experience to have. And I think that's true for prayer and miracles as well. So,
Erin, is there self-defense sort of skill that people can be building? We've sort of touched on that in ways, but just
mhm.
to really nail it down.
Yeah, I do think it's really important to learn to protect your mind. We are so focused on the body and learning all these jujitsu, taekwondo, girl self-defense class things. But if you can get the mind, then you can get the body. So really the mind is an even more powerful thing to get. And then this person starts giving you all this stuff for free, and you have access to their life and you have access to all the other whatever pieces of their life that you might want access to. So when you're learning about how to protect your mind, first things first is literally go slower, slow down, and see if someone's even okay with you doing that. Pay attention to how they respond to no's when you say no. Pay attention to if they're trying to tell you who you are instead of asking you who you are. Pay attention to if they're trying to rearrange you or your life without very early on, not even like later, but very early on, if they're trying to rearrange things because there's sort of a lack of tolerance for how your life or how you are. If you love your life and if you love who you are as a person, the other person should be okay with that too. And if they're not, then maybe they should date someone else. There's wiggle room for discussion on that, but I'm talking about the really big important things you need to know in order to protect yourself. What are deal breakers? What are things you're not willing to compromise on? You need to have that sort of rope to keep yourself tethered to where if you know for a fact, no, this is something I am not compromising on, and someone comes up and they go, hey, are you willing to compromise on that? You already know the answer. If you don't know the answer yet, that's a really tricky place to be in, and you're actually pretty vulnerable because now it's up for discussion. This thing that actually might be really vulnerable, or sorry, important, this very valuable, important thing is up for discussion because you haven't taken the time to figure out, hey, is this something I actually do want to maybe give away, or is this something that does need to stay in my life? So having that stuff kind of mapped out internally with yourself is really, really important. And also for self-defense, you need to know what your vulnerabilities are. We're obviously not going to always know what all of them are, but really looking internally, especially your mental vulnerabilities, like what areas are you insecure in? What areas are you willing to believe are damaged inside of you or not valuable? Because someone's going to pick up on that. And really, if they're predatory or manipulative, they're really going to dig in on that. So I would say those are some good places to start
Excellent.
more.
Yeah. Do you have a timeline on the book?
The trickiest part for me right now is, first of all, I've never published anything, so I literally don't even know where to do that.
Okay.
There's two activities left where I'm still trying to anyway, there's two activities left that I'm still trying to
Okay.
work out like how to do it. So
Okay. So I'll take that as a no.
yes.
Okay. Well, Erin Dorsey, before I ask my last question, where should people look for you online?
I am not many places online. I am mostly on YouTube, and my YouTube name is Ehren's Journal, so you can find me there.
And the spelling on that?
Ehren.
Great. We'll put a link to that in the description for people to check out. And Erin, my last question is about healthy relationships. That's a goal for a lot of people coming out of an event like we've been talking about. What are some things that people could look for in a healthy relationship?
Yeah, I think in healthier relationships, when I have learned about what's healthy, because I haven't had many successful romantic relationships yet, I've really learned about healthy relationships from my friends. And I am so grateful to them from the bottom of my heart for helping me reparent myself and almost being like supplemental parent mentors of sorts that I can look to and watch for an example of how to engage with people healthier. Um, but what I've learned from my friends is that love is the biggest word that comes to mind is acceptance, um, and honesty, and that's done in a safe and a healthy way. These are key qualities that come along later when you know the person and when you've built that trust. But it's someone who really can accept you when you're down, can accept you in your flaws, in whatever issues that you might have going on. Like they want to be on that journey with you, and there's a safety there with that person, that you know that people are not going to be running away and discarding each other and leaving, because you know each other well enough now that there is that safety there and that allowance to be a person, to be a human. It's about compromise, and I would say interdependency, not just one person depending on the other, and it's sort of lacking balance in that kind of way, but interdependency. And I just think there's just a safety there to be able to be yourself.
A great note to end on. Erin, thank you for sharing these things, for your way of communicating to people that we've talked about that's unique, and for people who think in metaphors and visuals and things, so valuable, and for taking the time to do this interview with me. And I look forward to hopefully something around when your book comes out. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
To help raise awareness about narcissistic abuse, please share this video. It helps a lot.